Okay, so my name is Cyril Crevoisier. I was working as a PhD student in Paris in the Laboratoire de Météorologie Dynamique with Alain Chédin, working on CO2 retrieval from Earth observations. I'm doing a postdoc in Princeton University in Jorge Sarmiento's group on estimating carbon sources and sinks at the surface. I'm working with Alain Chédin and Noël Scott from the Laboratoire de Météorologie Dynamique in Paris, who have been involved in using satellite observations since about 20 or 30 years now. So they have a very good knowledge of all these instruments. And they were first looking at the TOVS observations. The TOVS instruments were instruments which were launched since 1972 and which are still operating now. But they have a very small spectral resolution. That means that we cannot really extract all the information on different species, CO2, methane, etc. Whereas with Earth, the spectral resolution has really increased, so we have a lot more information on CO2. I guess in all the context of global warming and all these studies that just are appearing now, I was interested in this subject because it can give the beginning of an answer to all these problems and well, to try to make scientific improvements on that could benefit to everybody. Well, of course, retrieving CO2 in the atmosphere is already an achievement in itself, but it's really the first step before being able to have a good estimation of carbon sources and sinks at the surface. So what we really want to do, to achieve, is to use these satellite observations to improve the knowledge of CO2 carbon sources and sinks at the surface and to be able to model the future evolution of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is really the final goal. Well, I mean, many people are working on CO2 retrieval now, but everybody is using different techniques to try to retrieve CO2. Because we must keep in mind that the CO2 signal that can be seen on satellite observation is a very small signal as compared to other signals like temperature or water vapor. So we need actually to try to find different methods to compare the results we have and be confident in the results we retrieve. Okay, so basically there are different methods. Some of them rely on what we call a priori information. That means that we already have a kind of information on CO2. Well, we know that CO2 behaves like that or like this, and we try to use this information to combine that with Earth observations to improve this knowledge on CO2. My method does not really rely on big a priori information, but tries more to use directly the Earth observations to extract the information on CO2 itself and well, try to retrieve CO2. Earth data consists in brightness temperatures that are measured at different frequencies by the satellite, by the instrument. And what we take is we choose some frequencies where we know that CO2 in the atmosphere will influence the brightness temperatures we are measuring. And by studying kind of correlation between different measurements made at different frequencies, we can extract the variation of CO2 in the atmosphere. Well, the obstacles in the CO2 data are, come from various sources. First, so far, the CO2 information came mainly from observation made at the surface of the Earth. But we have a very limited number of stations who measure CO2. It's about 70 to 100 over the whole globe. So this is not enough to take a global picture of CO2 evolution and to really understand CO2 surface sources and sinks. So that was mainly the problem. That's why we are really interested in being able to have independent information on CO2 from space, because with the observation from space we can have a lot of information with the global coverage and all the temporal coverage of the satellites. There is what we call a global warming now. Temperature is increasing in the atmosphere. This is essentially due to the emission by human activities of CO2 in the atmosphere. But this evolution of CO2 in the atmosphere is not driven only by what we emit in the atmosphere, but also by what is absorbed by the surface. For example, the biosphere, or the tree, the plants, will emit CO2 by respiration, but also absorb CO2 by photosynthesis. So if we want to be able to model CO2 evolution in the atmosphere and be able to understand how the temperature will increase in the future, we need to understand carbon sources and sinks at the surface. Well, the next step in the study we have made so far is really to try from Earth observation to have information on CO2 over land, over sea, during day and during night, and to be able to compare all these products and to be able to extract some other signals. For example, with the TOVS observations, we have seen that by looking at daytime and nighttime observations, we were able to obtain a lot of information on fire, because fire have a diurnal cycle. So by making a difference between nighttime and daytime retrievals, we were able to retrieve a fire signal. So what we want to do now with Earth is do exactly the same thing, to be able to understand once more where CO2 is emitted and where CO2 is absorbed by the surface.